Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back in to break down the 19 Motherlode that Ellesmere had timed with Yoda and company, what the build is for Holy Pally, how it's playing these days, how to play it in high-end keys, and what is making it successful. Starting off, the build that Holy Paladins are playing these days has changed a few different times, but now you can actually run Light of the Martyr. It was changed in the War Within to no longer be an active ability, and now to instead buff up your Holy Shock healing, but when you use it for healing, it then creates a negative heal absorb onto your character that you need to heal off. A big thing, though, is that you can't just beacon yourself and have beacon heal it off. It will not work against this heal absorb. But when you're playing with Herald of the Sun, your Word of Glory, your Holy Power Spender, is replaced with Eternal Flame, which is a healing over time effect, which also does more healing to your character. And so you'll see throughout the VOD, he's constantly having Eternal Flame onto his own character when he's healing to start munching up that negative heal absorb. He is also running with Beacon of Faith. You're going to see this throughout the dungeon, where on Trash, he's using Beacon on the tank and the Boomkin. Perma has it on the Boomkin, in fact. And then on boss fights, you're going to see him shift it over a few different times to Hopeful to the Mage, so that he's having it on Mage and Boomkin for that extra layer of safety for them, because the tank may not need the extra defensive value out of Beacon because it gives damage reduction, and of course it transfers healing to their allies. Otherwise, the talent build is very standard, and the way Paladin is playing, if you're a little bit rusty on it, is very standard traditional sort of builder spender, with primary spender being Eternal Flame for healing with a healing over time effect, or if you're using it for damage, it will be with Shield of the Righteous. So the standard rotation for Holy Paladins that you're going to see throughout, when it comes to the damage, and you're going to see quite a lot of damage out of Ellesmere here in this run, he's keeping his Consecrate down, and then using his Judgment on cooldown, which also creates another Consecrate for additional damage. He is using his Hammer of Wrath about as much as he can on cooldown for damage, and it also creates healing with the Veneration talent, which is quite nice. Then using Holy Shock for damage, dumping Holy Power with Shield of the Righteous as needed. For the healing side, you're going to see a few different ways that he plays around a lot of the passives that Holy Paladin brings to the table, but the basic principles are keeping your Holy Shock on cooldown. You have 2 charges, and so you want to make sure that you're not overcapping whenever possible. Using your Holy Prism on cooldown, which is really important for Herald of the Sun, because it activates a key passive called Divine Purpose, which gives you a free spender that you could use for damage or healing, and it also means that you are applying the Dawn Lights, the additional healing or damage over time that Herald of the Sun brings to the table. And when you have wings up, that's what creates these laser lines for the spec. So it's really important to be using your Prism on cooldown, spreading your Dawn Light for healing or for damage depending on the situation. And Holy Prism also is giving you the Divine Favor buff. Now, he doesn't always take advantage of this buff because he doesn't need to on cooldown, but it does give you a more powerful Holy Light cast, which can produce some really, really heavy healing as needed. So he's keeping the shocks on cooldown, using Prism on cooldown, casting Holy Light as needed, spending his Holy Power on Eternal Flame, not on Light of Dawn, is still there, not on that whatsoever, and he's also making sure, as needed, he's still just building up as much of this Holy Power as he can, because being able to spend enough of it is proccing his Awakening, which is giving you additional wings uptime. And you'll see a few different moments throughout this dungeon where he even is kind of pooling up his Holy Power or trying to generate it as fast as possible to get another wings proc to carry him through some of this heavy damage. Paladins are still using Blessing of Summer. This is the rotating buff. Starting with Summer is giving you a buff which is turning your healing into damage on enemies, so he always casts that on himself. Autumn gives cooldown reduction, which he's giving to Hopeful for the Mage cooldown reduction. Going into Winter, which gives mana, and then into Spring, which gives increased healing and increased healing taken, which he's almost always putting onto himself, which is great for removing some of that Light of the Martyr negative heal absorb that we've seen. So most of the time, you're just kind of casting it onto yourself, and there's not too much thought you really have to worry about. One of the coolest things in a high M plus group is how well people are using all their defensives, all their resources together, and you're able to see on Ellie's screen how he is able to track everybody's party cooldowns. He has full interrupt tracker on the left side, but he also has trackers for everybody's party-wide defensives, things like AMZ, Mass Barrier from Mage, his own Devo Aura. And then right below it, you'll be able to see the crowd controls that his team has access to. And what drives a lot of his decision making, which is insanely important for Holy Paladin, for using more damage or more healing, is knowing, hey, we have damage reduction, or he even has a tracker for like Vigil from Dwilks to know when off healing is present for his team, so he can add in additional damage to make sure the pack goes a lot faster. Holy Paladin does a really big amount of damage in this season, and especially when you're at a really high key level, the difference of a few seconds of a shorter pull is really, really strong when you have a very limited amount of kicks, stuns, interrupts. You're going to have diminishing returns, of course, coming in for your crowd controls, so it makes a huge impact. These early pulls, he is just focusing almost entirely on damage. The very first pull they do, they grab everything in together at the very start of the instance, and they're just nuking it down with very little time spent on healing. And the second pull, so they basically have a long walk after the first pull, and then they're running around, skipping through a lot of trash. Yoda is grabbing some of the mechs to the side for the first boss room, using his shadow meld, making sure everyone's able to skip. And there's a lot of RP before the coin-operated crowd pummeler is going to be active. And so they're able to instantly go from one huge pull into another and have all of their crowd control up and all their damage and healing cooldowns up for that second pull as well. And the second pull, he's basically entirely just doing damage because they have damage reduction, they've got crowd control, and a lot of off healing out of Dwilks. So that second pull, Dwilks is actually just doing more healing than Ellie is because it's just all off healing. He can focus on damage the entire time and make it go a lot faster. The coin-operated crowd pummeler is not an ultra difficult boss, but even at a 19 level, you have to be careful, as there is a crazy amount of burst damage that's happening each time when the boss is knocking you back, as well as a large follow-up dot. So big things that they have to make sure they focus on is, one, having the versatility, damage reduction to actually survive that knockback, and some kind of healing cooldown or some kind of healing tools every time to make sure that they're going to be able to live. So you'll see them constantly rotating between either like mass barrier or own personals, making sure that there's healing cooldowns available almost every single time. And this is where those cooldown trackers really come into play, so that you know that you always have some kind of defensive every single time. You can even see in the top right where Ellie is using a versatility flask for the first half of this dungeon, just because of the survivability focus that he needs to have. Plus, it also amps up his damage, which is great for a lot of these pulls where he's able to just focus on it. Crowd Pummeler, of course, is kicking out these foot bombs that need to be kicked into the boss, and you'll notice each time the foot bombs go out that they're going to wait for one final foot bomb as long as they possibly can to then extend the damage amp for the boss, so that you can just do even more damage and you have just higher uptime onto it. This is a really important time as a healer, no matter which one that you are, to make sure that you're min-maxing your damage, because what happens is the damage amp will fade about like 4 or 5 seconds before the static pulse goes out. And so you have a lot of time to do damage and then start getting yourself set up to deal with the static pulse. Once the dot actually falls off from the static pulse, you have tons of time really to make sure that you're topping everybody off before the next round. What you'll end up seeing is almost every single global that he's casting after the static pulse debuff falls off is just pure damage, because you have like 25 to 30 seconds after the dot falls off before another static pulse happens. So every single global that you can put into damage helps accelerate the fight, and that's doubly true if you're going to have the damage amp onto it as well. After the boss fight, they have to deal with some of the more extractors as well as some of the Earthshapers. You can even see on his UI the like focus nameplates popping up to encourage him to make sure that he is focusing the target that he needs to make sure that he is interrupting. And this is also a nice area where you can start learning a little bit about the game. After all the damage starts going out, after all the crowd control starts going out, there was not able to get a kick for the Earthshaper, and it is a projectile with the Rock Lance. And if you didn't know, whenever projectiles in the game are flying towards their target, they've already decided how much damage they're going to do. and damage reduction effects will not have an impact past that point. So unfortunately, Ellie is mashing, and you can even see it on his bars. He's mashing Divine Protection to mitigate the damage of the Rock Lance that goes out. It does not come off cooldown fast enough. Should have had a Symbol of Hope. And the projectile is in the air as he activates Divine Protection. It has no effect on the lance itself, and then that is actually what kills him off. Unfortunately, that's kind of how the game works. He popped his defensives, he did everything he possibly could to survive. That's just an unfortunate occurrence with how the game works, and it would have me raging for sure if it happened to me. Okay, so this is really cool. Azerokk is the really big heal check that you have to be thinking about, planning your cooldowns around, not just as a healer, of course, but as a damage dealer. And this is where it's super difficult to sort of like make good decisions unless you have a group that's in voice, hashing things out right off the bat. Azerokk, of course, is going to empower one of his elementals. It starts pulsing damage, it starts taking more damage, and you need to do an insane amount of healing every single time that that ad is out. So when they go into the fight, beacons are swapped to DPS. They're swapping it off of Yoda onto Hopeful to help mitigate some of that incoming damage. And for the very first wave, they have Devo, a Wings proc out of the Awakening talent. And he's got Divine Toll. He pretty much has Divine Toll every single time, with the tier set bonus applying those little insurance buffs, which does a decent amount of healing, right? But it's not going to carry you or anything like that. And this is an area where they sort of barely survive. And the problem with it is that, Paladin can always have some kind of cooldowns available every single time, but you're also at the mercy of how much damage that your group has. The super threatening part of the encounter is when you get the nasty combos of not having enough damage to kill off the ad before the ground pound comes from the boss. And that's another layer of damage that they have to make sure that they end up surviving. Huge area for having Verse Flask, a lot of Verse on your gear just in general. And the first wave is like really scary as a result. Second wave, because the damage also lasts for a while, he has to start spacing cooldowns a little bit more. And so he uses Bubble Sack and just bubbles himself, sacks Hopeful, and starts mitigating a lot of the damage. And this is really helpful for Paladin to plan around how you want to use Bubble Sack, because a lot of their healing is asymmetric. You're not healing everybody together at the exact same time the way like Voidweaver Disc did in Season 1. Instead, you're putting out really high value Eternal Flames, which have high crit chance the lower health the target is. So you can really pump health into one person if they're low, but you can't do a great job of healing everybody at the exact same time. And so having people using their defensives on cooldown or almost on cooldown is massive. And being able to realize which targets need a lot of output and which ones don't is very big as well. So the second wave, they have Bubble Sack and Wings. Third wave, they have Lust, and this is where he's not using major cooldowns, not only because haste is great for Holy Paladin, so he can generate a lot of holy power really quickly, spend it on Eternal Flames, cover everybody with healing, but also because you're just going to kill the ad really, really fast with Lust up and cooldowns up. Makes it a lot easier for him. Fourth wave, he has Wings once more. And then the fifth wave, he's got Devotion Aura back, he's got Divine Toll back, he's got Wings procs, and they're able to kill off Azerokk as well. So a lot of the effort onto this encounter is making sure your DPS are pooling properly, and when you might have like Bubble up or other allies have like defensives up, a lot of extra damage is coming from hitting those judgment casts, trying to weave in a Hammer of Wrath here and there. That goes a really long way in stopping more damage and more pulsing damage onto your group. Because keep in mind, you're having Hammer of Wrath, which is proccing healing from the Veneration talent. Your Judgment is healing yourself with Truth Prevails, and any overheal is going to allies. And you have Greater Judgment, which is also soaking up future damage from that elemental as well. So there's a lot of little passive heal effects that Paladin brings to the table while actively dealing damage. They're producing some amount of healing or mitigation for the group. And so you're not going to see too many other healers that do things like that in the game, which is really a cool niche, but it's often kind of unnoticed or underappreciated for the spec. You definitely will see him using Holy Prism on cooldown to give him those Divine Purpose procs, and a lot of the mana expenditure that he's having on the fight is coming from casting lots of Holy Lights with that Divine Favor buff. It's really good healing transfers into beacon targets. It generates more holy power. When you're consuming an infusion of life proc, you're also reducing the cooldown of your holy shock in the process. So there's a lot of like cross synergy with the entire spec. I'm sure if you just like searched holy shock in like the talent page and everything for Holy Paladin, the amount of like magnifying glasses that light up all over the place is immense. There's so much like cross synergy that gets maintained with the Paladin tree. After they kill off Azerokk, they go into like the research wing here in the Motherlode, and one of the most scary areas really of the dungeon. This is still an area that he's running with like the versatility flask, as you have to deal with alchemists, which are putting out poisons onto your group, where he's pretty much dispelling on cooldown. The class tree talent, where if you dispel one of your allies, you're proccing a heal on them. I believe it's called a just reward. This got buffed like by 1,000% or something ridiculous. It actually procs like a decent enough heal once they kept buffing it like 50 different times. That's a decent heal for whenever he's able to get his dispels on cooldown, but there's so many of these poison debuffs that go out at a time that he's pretty much never able to keep everyone like perma-cleansed. And there's even some moments where instead he's just focusing on a lot of the single target, because you have the masterminds, which are casting this like mind lash, focusing huge damage into one target. This is a huge area for your UI to have a targeted spells, either a weak aura. The indicator tab in Cell also does this, so you can see who is targeted by these abilities and make sure you're focusing more healing into them every single time. Another really tough area of this is dealing with weapon testers, because they have the echo blades that are going out that are putting out basically a wave onto the target. It's going to cleave everybody nearby. So if you can, you need to have everyone spread out. And as a melee healer, Ellie also has to be really aware of like where the tank is standing, so he doesn't get those cleaves going off. They're also using a lot of their crowd control to make sure when they see the cast going off, that they're making sure they're interrupting them. If there's any double taps that are happening, or if there's only one going out, they're making sure that they're spread. Once they get to about 70% enemy forces, Yoda is doing another Shadow Meld skip to get past the multiple masterminds, and then they're having Hopeful run up to the other side of Rixxa Fluxflame's room to tag one of the mechs, the war machines, on the other side and bring it into Rixxa Fluxflame. This is really difficult. Even though this boss is very easy, grabbing the war machine on top of it makes it quite a lot harder, since you're having big AoE damage happening about every 20 seconds. And so as a Holy Paladin, you need to have another round of sort of cooldown orders every single time. And while you really want to be min-maxing your damage onto this to make sure that you're going to be able to have output as needed, this is where, with Ellie's setup, he has the Mr. Pick-Me-Up trinket and he has the Mugsy Jug to help him muscle heal through a lot of this incoming damage. It's really good on Azerokk, and I think it's really helpful for these war machines with how consistent of damage they have going out every single time. What you really end up having to think about as a Holy Paladin in particular is the pulsing damage that goes out onto the group means you need to kind of heal everybody at the same time, but depending on their defensives, this is really the area where you have to make a couple of like very important decisions. If you have Bubble Up, for example, you're never touching any healing onto yourself, and then you can sack somebody else to make sure that you don't have to heal yourself or that other person. So all your healing is going into, DPS 3 and 4 as a result. And so making sure every time different people are using different defensives or different cooldowns, or sometimes you're going to have wings up and you can muscle heal through all of it, is a really key part of healing at these ultra high levels, because you can't just have everybody's health bars get pushed up all at the exact same time. Divine Toll does a decent amount of AoE healing, but a bigger part of it is the Rising Sunlight effect, giving you the additional Holy Shock hits after you cast Divine Toll, and the additional holy power after the fact, so you can hit some really heavy Eternal Flames, especially as players are low, to get the crit effect, to make sure you muscle heal through all this incoming damage. Now, you might have thought that grabbing one of the war machines is really tough, so why not grab another one when the first one dies? And that's exactly what they do. I believe they have Hopeful sending an Arcane Orb off into the corner, grabs the Ordnance Special alongside of the war machine, but they're able to make sure that they just put Demon Hunter Cage on onto the Ordnance Specialist, so they don't have to deal with any additional like RPGs or targeted ground effects, because that would make the fight just impossible. And then they have to heal through another round of War Machines the entire way. So it's actually a really brutal boss fight pulling this additional trash, but it's super, super efficient coming from a healing perspective and from like an overall trash perspective. Now, you might have thought the third boss is crazy, but they do an insane pull right afterwards with mines, war machines, about like 4 ordnance specialists, so there's nowhere safe to stand, but they grab so many mobs from all over the room that you basically can't help but have all of these mines everywhere, and you have a lot of space to move around once you've activated all of these mines. So it's super important to get really close in together, stack up all these mines as best as you possibly can, and then you're just constantly stutter stepping, dealing with the next round of artillery barrages from the specialists every single time. So a lot of times this is actually the big benefit of Holy Paladin at the moment, is that you'd like to be in melee, but you're not forced to be in melee the entire time. And this is where he's able to take advantage of some of the more caster-centric spells that also did get buffed going into 11.1. There's one more final meld skip out of Yoda, so there's 3 in this dungeon that he takes advantage of. That allows him to skip the double war machine and go into Mogul Razdunk. Pretty much the entirety of the fight, they are sitting onto this one safe spot, as they just don't have to move around from that location. But some of the challenging ones can be when you have to deal with some of the barrages happening at the same time as some like the Gatling guns. These can be really, really nasty if you get some of the like the bad RNG for some of the timings or some of the placement. And so you have to be really aware of like, do you take a hit from the Gatling gun and pop a defensive or an immunity to make sure you can survive the Gatling gun hit so you don't get giga stomped by like one of the bolts. Thankfully, they have pretty good RNG onto this, and they very quickly get into that first intermission phase, but you can see a couple moments where he does have to run out to play a little overly safe. Scariest part of Mogul Razdunk absolutely has to be the intermission phase, as you'll even see he has the versatility flask back on for this point because the burst damage is ultra high, and the Sky Scorchers deal an insane amount of damage with their buster shots, and they can basically just keep on pounding damage into the same targets over and over and over again. So you need to have basically every healing cooldown or every tool at your disposal. And so you'll quickly see them taking advantage of like Nature's Vigil early on as they're trying to burst them down really quick. And they get some pretty good RNG of making sure they're having them stacked together and they're able to clear it out very quickly. This is very much one of those like group task sort of assignments. And so you don't actually see like Darkness or Devo Aura getting ripped super early when those ads are out because they did such an efficient job of dealing with them. But if they didn't, that's where you basically have to throw the entire kitchen sink at dealing with the huge damage of both the stomps from Mogul Razdunk and the Sky Scorcher damage as they're just cleaving and focusing targets down. It's a really big area that the entire group has to like pool resources to help DPS it down faster. And that's a lot of the theme, I would say, for Motherlode is how can you make like the healer's job a little bit easier by pooling up damage to deal with a lot of like priority targets and a lot of like heavy targets. Having a coordinated group absolutely helps, but what really, I think, seals the deal from a healing perspective is how well that he is focused in advance and knowing in advance where the damage is going out and who is the most vulnerable target every single time to set up his Eternal Flames on targets to make sure that he is not going to get killed, for example, when he's hitting his Blessing of Sacrifice. A lot of times you're seeing the bubble sacks going out or him switching to the versatility flask as well to have an easier time. And making sure that he's reducing a lot of the damage onto the group through min-maxing a lot of his own damage. So many targets in this dungeon in particular get a lot easier when you're adding even more damage on top of it. And whenever they get the boss finally down, they have about 2.5 minutes to spare as they've cleared it. And he's looking at about 850k DPS overall in the dungeon. So really, really high damage coming in for Paladin. The mitigation tools that they have to both do damage and mitigate incoming hits with things like Greater Judgment or do healing with Veneration talents are really, really nice to have in the kit. And it's a big reason that he's able to be so successful with the 18s and 19s that he's been doing lately. So it's really cool to see. Even though I think Holy Pally is one of the least represented in high keys at the moment, he is able to use his kit to full effect, and it's really cool to be able to see. So big thanks to Ellie, of course, for letting me use his content for this video, and if you haven't checked him out already, we'll have some links in the description down below as well. Big love to him, big thanks to our patrons for making all this content possible. Hope you all found this interesting and useful. Let me know what healer or what dungeon you guys would be interested in seeing next time. Thanks for watching, I'll catch you all next time.